calendar in terms of big announcements, and we were there to possibly get round it all because it truly is a humongous exhibition, including some that we didn't cover from each cycle live in the UK next week. And so if you want to see a lot of these new bikes in the flesh and get up close to them, have a sit on them and ask some questions, then I'd thoroughly. We'll be there on the 18th and 19th, which is the Monday and Tuesday, so do say hello if you see us working our way round. And new for 2025 Touareg Rally. This is a more serious version of the already very good Touareg 660 adventure bike that's inspired by some of their recent racing success out in Africa. As you'd expect for a rally version, it sits a little bit taller in the seat with a rally saddle. There's more protection from some of the hardware like the handguards and the sump guard, and you've got some upgraded components like stronger wheels and also the internals on the suspension. Then we also took a look at the new Tourances 475, the sports bike which I rode a couple of weeks back, and I think this one might be a good seller because I really like that new 450 engine, the parallel twin, but of course being in a sports bike ergonomic, that might not be. This is just the tip of the iceberg though for Aprilia. We did those 2 videos, but we couldn't get around the rest, and that included a new RS125 and Tourances 125 update, and also changes to the RS660, which now gets some aero winglets at the front, some new paint jobs which I really did like, and they also say under the hood circuitry also got some updates, so it gets more power, it gets the full 105 horsepower that you get on the RS660, revisions to the tech, and also an Olin suspension package. Now their top dog RSV4 gets revised aerodynamics for 2025. I think it gets a bit more power at 220 horsepower, and also some tweaks to the tech package, and a lot of those same updates carried over to the Tourances V4 equivalent, so like the winglets, the tech, and things like that, although this one gets a more road trip. So look, a big year for Aprilia. I guess they've been forced somewhat, like a lot of the manufacturers here, with the Euro 5B or 5+ emissions regulations that are coming into place soon, but all the same, still, I think a very impressive amount of new stuff. It was Benelli, but of course I was on my phone in the evenings and looking at some of the coverage coming out from EMICA, and a couple of their bikes did catch my eye. One was the TRK 902 Explorer concept, which was brand new, making its debut at EMICA, and it does look pretty serious in terms of off-road spec, but I think the most interesting talking point was the 904cc twin-cylinder engine that they say is going to make 100 horsepower and 90 Nm of peak torque, so fairly competitive stuff. And if they do make this a production model and get the price right, then it could be a nice alternative, let's say, to some of the existing middleweight adventure bikes on the market. Then the other one that I really like the look of was the Leoncino Bobber 400, which, as you might have guessed from the name, has a fairly relaxed bobber style, ergonomic and aesthetic, so a nice big chunky front wheel, an easygoing cruiser style riding position, and also at the heart of it, another new engine. This one's a 60-degree V-twin with just under 400 cc's of displacement, so it's 384.5, and they say it makes 34.5 horsepower and 36 Nm of peak torque, so a nice little A2 stylish bike that, again, if the price is right, could be a returning to world superbike, and this is the bike that their race bike will be based upon. It's actually called the KB998, and this one is built upon the Kawasaki ZX-10RR, with Kawasaki, of course, being the owners of the motor. In fact, they'll be supporting the racing team as well, and they need to make and sell 500 of these to be able to homologate it and therefore compete in World Superbikes. So they say they're going to make 125 this year, 125 next year, and I think 250 the year after that. Now, there are some nice details if you look into it. It's got a tubular steel frame, billet side plates, billet yokes, and top spec chassis components. And so look, you know, being a homologation special, this is going to cost tens of thousands of pounds, so it's largely irrelevant to most of us, but that's still not going to stop me admiring it. It really does look pretty fantastic. Divided opinion when it comes to the looks, but I did have chance to ride it recently, and it is a fantastic, like the M1000RR super premium sports bike, the S1000RR equivalent, and then also one of the bikes that I really like the look of when they announced this new lineup a couple of weeks back was that new S1000R Naked, but in the sort of blue and lime paint job, which really does stand out from the crowd. And I had chance the GS concept, which looks like it's going to be a new entrant into this sort of booming 450 class of adventure bikes in 2025, because they do say it should actually go into production. To me, it looks really, chassis looks interesting. It's nice and tall. It looks like it's going to have some genuine off-road ability whilst also being slim and lightweight. The tech package looks decent. It's got the proper BMW dash and also the left-hand jog wheels, so hopefully it gets all of the latest latest goodies from BMW. And then at the heart of it, this new parallel twin around the sort of 450 capacity, but interesting motorcycle before, certainly not on a BMW. And so it gives it a bit of an interesting sound and feel, which will help to separate it from some of the other options on the market. To their stand and show some of their bikes, one of those being CF Moto. But if you don't have the press releases and specs and prices available yet, then it's pretty hard to spec a video and actually tell you anything about the bikes. So this was one we didn't quite get round to, but I do really like the look of some of these bikes that they got coming. We just didn't have much information on them. Certainly the new 675 powered bikes, so the sports bike and also the NK Naked, do look of interest, and they look like they could be great options against some of the established bikes in the middleweight, affordable sports and naked markets. But then also they had some pretty interesting new concepts, pretty breathtaking in terms of the aesthetics. And then from a technical perspective, also a new 997cc V4. Now I assume these two might be somewhat mated together. Of course, the production bike's not going to look quite as extreme as that. It's going to make 209 horsepower peak at 14,500 RPM, 114 Newton meters of peak torque. And so yeah, it sounds like they're about to get pretty serious. You know, it's not quite the most powerful V4 ever made, but it's certainly up there with some of the big, and so I'm really interested to see what they come out with. And look, last year they showed the inline triple that's gone into those 675 bikes, so it wouldn't be that surprising if this engine does in fact make it to a bike next year. New Panigale V2, which uses their new V2 engine. Now it is quite a bit down on power in terms of comparing it to the previous generation Panigale V2. It's 120 horses, down from around about 155. But look, they've shed a lot of weight. They say it's their lightest ever Panigale. Fantastic. In fact, I would say, having seen the Panigale V4 at a launch event a couple of months back, this, because it's a little bit more slim and slender, is my favorite of the two. On top of that, you've got the new Street Fighter equivalent with the flat bars and without the fairing, so that looks like quite an interesting update as well. You had the new Scrambler update, so there's a Rizoma Special Edition as well as the more affordable Scrambler Icon Dark. The updated new Multistrada V4 for 2025, which has some tech that I really want to try out. Things like bump detection on the suspension, so if the fork detects a bump, it'll instantly soften up the shock to try and take that sort of jarring impact out of the ride. And so yeah, lots of interesting things to look at on their stand, and they've also got two more announcements to go this year, with one at the end of November and one at the start of December. So the next one's called the Next Level Formula, that's the one at the end of November, and then the one in December is called the RS, which is a small retro. Fantastic looking, has already been on sale in some form in Asia for a year or two now, but it'll now be a really practical, brilliant all-rounder. This one gets some nice new updates, a bit of a tweak to the DCT system, a new styling package as well. And also we filmed the Honda CB1000, so really enjoyed looking at that one. It's just under 10 grand, which seems like a heck of a lot of bike for the money. But then on top of all that, well, they had a bunch of other announcements that we just didn't get round to. So the CB750 Hornet, so let me know what you think of this update in the comments too. They've also tweaked the damping on the suspension to give gets these updates as well. So the new front end, I think it looks a lot better, a little bit more Africa Twin vibe. And also you've got the new Rebel 1100 and NT 1100. They were announced in advance, but first chance to see those in the flesh. And the CL500 Scrambler got some new colors, a new seat and pegs. And also the engine's now made Euro 5 Plus compliant, as is pretty much the case with most of these bikes. So plenty of updates to the existing lineup, some tweaks to just kind of make sure that they're incorporating customer feedback. One of them is the EV Fun concept, which is their stab at what a recreational electric motorcycle could look like. And look, they didn't say much in terms of details, so there's no power or range or charging times or anything like that. But from the pics, you can see it's a very sporty looking setup with that typical sort of naked stance, a decent spec on the sort of hardware and equipment, and also I've got to say the looks are pretty incredible too. I really like that svelte tail section. But the thing that concept which has forced induction, and yeah, I think I want to dive into this a little deeper at some point, because they do say it will make it to production at some point. But basically the idea is that the V3 architecture makes it really super slim and compact, but then the air compressor basically allows them to boost torque right across the rev range. So yeah, a big one from Honda, lots of updates as usual. usual and lots of bikes to add to our list of things to review this year. Now Husky, a fantastic looking bike that's built upon the KTM 790 Duke, which is a fantastic bike to ride, so it should be a match made in heaven. And while there was nothing completely new on their stand, because we already kind of knew about that bike, well, they did have this, a custom version, which I thought looked pretty phenomenal. You've got a disc wheel at the rear, you've got carbon bodywork, a mini TFT display, fancy suspension and brakes, but also that brilliant looking underseat exhaust. So look, not a bike that will be on the market, but it's amazing to see their new Ninja 1000 SX and Versys 1000. We covered those a couple of weeks back. And also the new Z900, which isn't a particularly spectacular update, but there are some nice little tweaks, and it is a solid performer in that middleweight sporty sector. Then you've got the SE versions of some of those bikes as well, so if you want to pay a bit extra for some more fancy spec, you can do that. And the only other thing of note was the fact that they did tease a new KL. What's interesting about it is the fact that it had two exhaust headers visible at the front there, so it will be a parallel twin engine. And so yeah, possibly another contender now in this, like I say, booming 450 adventure bike sector that put new bikes. And one of them that we covered that I think is going to be a really fun bike to ride is the new 1390 Super Duke GT. More power, more tech. I also quite like the new styling package, and also the Super Adventure Evo, which is going to use their new AMT or automated manual transmission. So that's their first ever automatic bike. Now they also had the new 990 Duke R, which is the successor, let's say, to the 890 Duke R. So you can basically think of a 990 Duke, but with a bit more power, more spec, fancier components, and in pictures and stuff like that. But it was kind of covered up in camouflage, whereas this one looked like it was in the finish that it will be sold in, which is pretty soon. They also had a track version of that bike, which had some fancy bits fitted to it. That looked pretty good as well. And then we also covered the existing 390 Adventure. This one looks really good and like another lightweight adventure bike. So I guess anyone looking for that sort of bike is going to have plenty of choice in 2025. And also, you got to say, it's good to see the industry deliver to bikes that are easier to manage off-road and also don't cost the earth if you drop them and damage them. They did also show the Enduro version of that 390 Adventure R and also the Supermoto, which I had chance to sit on and check out. And I believe there are 125 equivalents of each of those as well. 1890 Super Duke GT, although I was a big 890 Duke R fan as well, so that successor should be a lot of fun out on the road too. Or I absolutely love the look of this. It's always been a bike that I've really enjoyed, but some of these updates should make it better to ride. You've got a little bit more poke from the engine, better suspension, twin discs up front, extra electronics with an inertial measurement unit, and also a lime green paint job, which we all know adds about 10 horsepower. Then there were new colours for the V100 Mandello. Celebrate 70 years of their wind tunnel testing facility. It's a bit of a niche thing to celebrate, but fair enough. And then also a V100 Stelvio in a special edition called the Duecento, and that one sells very nice indeed. I think that sort of blue, white and red paint job suits adventure bikes very nicely. And we have the Corsaro GT, which is a 750cc V-twin powered tall sports tourer adventure bike, off-road biased mini adventure bike called the All to Hike. Perhaps the one which uses a new 350cc V-twin as the platform, and that also gets used on the Bobber style Rumble. So some really interesting bikes there at both the more premium end and the more affordable end. And I gotta say, Marini always seem to pull out all the stops for EICMA. Just again, very busy with the Italian public. And the big stories were their F3 Competizione, which is a super spec version of the F3 RR with 160 horsepower peak, top spec equipment, carbon bodywork including some brake cooling ducts and an Akropovich silencer. That looks pretty amazing. I think that might be the best looking sports bike on the market right now. It certainly must be up there. And then also their Ottantesimo collection, which celebrates 80 years of MV Agusta by using their first ever logo on the tank, and it is quite a nice looking little logo that suits these bikes nicely. So I believe that will be available on the Brutali, the Dragster, the Brutali 1000, so the normal bike and the RR, and also the F3 and the Super Veloce sports bike. So plenty of which is a new scrambler interpretation of the Interceptor. So naturally it gets semi-knobbly tires, jacked up a little bit, but also the new round TFT display with the connectivity and paint job, and has some really nice details like the headlight nacelle with some of the instruments set into it. You could say though, heritage model names, the Flying Flea, except this time it's electric and it comes in the form of this small city commuter. Again, like the Honda, electric concept. There's no range, no classic styling points like the single seat, the girder style forks. But then also it does look modern as well. They've balanced the two very nicely with that arcing frame out to that bobber rear end. And so yeah, maybe this is the time that a major manufacturer actually makes a proper go. There are updates for 2025, so the SV650, some of the GSX-Rs. But the big update was the DRZ400, DRZ4S for the Dual Sport, and the DRZ4SM for the Supermoto version. Now there's a new engine, a new chassis, new technology as well, with some power modes and different traction control modes and ABS modes and stuff like that. But ultimately it still is a fairly simple bike, which I guess is some of the original appeal. I guess this one all comes down to price though. If they've made a lot of changes and that's meant that they've had to bump up the price significantly, then that really will deter at times. And it did seem to be fairly busy with a lot of people checking out their new Icon collection of the Bonnevilles. So no mechanical changes to these bikes, but it's just a new finish that's available just for one model year. And each of them has the tank painted with this Heritage Triumph logo, which really does suit some of those bikes. Also, probably the first chance for the Italian public to see the new Speed Twin 1200 and 900s, along with the new Tiger Sport 860, and just boost things up in terms of performance with a bigger engine, more adjustability in the suspension, and better brakes too, along with, you know, a bit more wind protection from a bigger fairing. For me, this is one of the bikes that I'm probably most looking forward to riding next year because I really like that 660, but with about 30 more horsepower, I think this one will be even more fun. Now, updates, so do check out the full video on that one if you want to get all of the details. Then some big announcements as well in the past few weeks. A sports bike based upon the excellent MT-09, that'll have been popular. The new Tracer 9, which it's got to be said is pretty but ugly at the front end, but apparently those new headlights are really good from a visibility perspective, so potentially worthwhile. And also it gets their new AMT or automated manual transmission on some of the versions. And the super popular MT-07 middleweight naked, well, that got updated just before EICMA as well, and that again gets their AMT, so probably one of the most affordable and still fun automatic bikes on the market now. But look, there was plenty of other stuff that kind of flew under the radar because of all these big updates. The R3 and the XSR 900, the MT-125 and MT-03 nakeds, they got new colors as well, along with more connectivity from a revision to the tech. And also, well, look, it is a big year for them with lots of new bikes and updates. Now, for me, the big hitters had to be KTM with loads of new bikes, Honda, Yamaha, and also Piaggio Group. It has the screen as well, so you can check out all the full walkarounds that we made actually at the show. So do check those out if you want us to go into a little bit more depth. Also, do hit subscribe if you want to see all of our motorcycle live content that's starting in about a week or so. We're going to recap by manufacturer all of the new bikes as well as some of our existing favorite models. So definitely hit subscribe, and if you are in the UK,